My name is Savannah Lee Granger. I'm 33, and I was supposed to be getting married in 6 weeks. But today, instead of picking ribbon swatches or reviewing floral mock-ups, I'm staring at a screenshot of my mother, grinning under a first-class sign at the airport, cocktail in hand, sun hat tilted just so. This after telling me for months that they couldn't afford to contribute a single dollar to my wedding. The timing? Picture perfect. The betrayal? Subtle at first. Then it kicked me in the ribs. Have you ever caught your own family smiling through a lie you tried to believe for too long? Drop a comment if you've ever funded peace by silencing your own disappointment. Because what happened next? It made me cancel everything. Let me take you back to where it started, with a quiet voicemail, a late payment notice, and a pit in my stomach I couldn't ignore. The first email that morning was from my caterer. Subject line: final payment reminder. I didn't even open it. I already knew the number, $2,400. I had it scribbled on a sticky note taped to the fridge, right next to a faded grocery list and a save the date from my own wedding. I stood barefoot in the kitchen, one hand wrapped around a chipped coffee mug, the other scrolling through my phone like I was looking for something I'd lost but didn't remember dropping. The voicemail from Mama had come in at 6:12 a.m. Hey baby, just wanted to say we're praying for sunshine on your special day. Love you. That was it. No. Call me back. No mention of the vendor forms I'd emailed her twice, just sunshine. She had the voice she uses in church, gentle, bright, and meant for other people to hear. It didn't sit right. I walked back to my little garage studio, where half-finished boutonnieres and silk ribbons were scattered across the folding table. The air still smelled faintly of eucalyptus and hot glue. My stomach tightened at the sight of it. This was supposed to be the fun part. Instead, I was arguing with myself about whether to message Brett again. He hadn't responded to my text from 2 days ago. All I'd asked was if he was still planning to help with chairs and setup. Simple, neutral, logistics. I picked up my phone. Still nothing from him. Instead, a new text had just come in from Tiana. Girl, you see this? Screenshot attached. I tapped it open. And there it was. A Facebook post from Brett's girlfriend, Macy. The two of them grinning in front of a Delta first-class lounge sign. Caption: Bora Bora, we're coming for ya. Number, family trip number, finally unplugged. My mouth went dry. The date stamp? Yesterday. I read the caption again, then looked at the background. Not a travel ad. Not a throwback. A full drink in hand. Matching luggage. Brand new flip-flops. I stared for a full minute before I realized I hadn't breathed. They told me they couldn't afford to help. That things were tight. That the timing of the wedding was rough. Mama even cried on the phone last month, said she hated letting me down. Said she felt like a failure of a mother. I believed her. I believed every word because I wanted to. Because I didn't want to be the kind of daughter who saw through the guilt and called it what it was. Manipulation. My thumb hovered over the phone. Tiana was already typing. You okay? I wasn't. I sat down on the old stool beside my workbench, staring at the last bouquet I'd made, a mix of dried lavender and artificial garden roses. It was supposed to be for my rehearsal table. Now, it just looked like something I'd have to resell. I hit play on Mama's voicemail again. Just that same sing-song tone. Praying for sunshine. She knew they were boarding a flight when she left it. That was the part that hit me sideways, the fact that she'd smiled into that lie and sent it like a postcard. As if I'd never notice. As if I'd never matter enough to explain. A new text came in, this time from Brett. Hope you're not expecting miracles. We got our own lives. That was it. No, hey, no emoji. Just a sentence that smelled like shrugged shoulders and a beer in his hand. I stared at the words until they blurred. Then I stood up, pulled out a pen, and crossed through the sticky note on my fridge. Sube. If they could afford first class to paradise, I could afford to stop pretending this was still going to feel like home. The photo wouldn't stop blinking in my head. My mom in her oversized sun hat. Brett's smug smirk. The words finally unplugged. They were sitting in first class, boarding passes up like trophies. And here I was, plugging numbers into a spreadsheet, trying to decide whether I could afford to add twinkle lights to the archway. I sat in my garage studio, surrounded by half-open bins of silk florals and tangled ivory ribbons, and suddenly, it felt like all of it, the effort, the careful budgeting, the heart I'd poured into every detail was for a day that nobody else took seriously. At least, nobody who shared my blood. I opened my planner and flipped back 3 months. The 14th of March. That was the night Mama called sobbing, said she hated that she couldn't give me anything toward the venue. It breaks my heart, baby girl. I swear, if we had it, you'd have it. I remembered standing in that exact spot. On speakerphone. Glue gun in one hand, listening as she wept about how Social Security barely covered her prescriptions. I told her not to worry. I told her I understood. Because I did. Or, I thought I did. Back then, I was the one trying to convince her not to feel bad. I closed the planner and looked at the stack of unpaid vendor invoices beside it. My name was on every single line. Not one charge shared, not one check cashed from anybody else in this family. And I'd been okay with it. I'd made peace with the idea of carrying more than my fair share because I wanted the day to feel good. I wanted it to be beautiful. I wanted them to be proud. That was the part I couldn't stop circling in my own head, the fact that I hadn't asked for much. Just a little help. A few chairs. Some folding tables. Maybe a couple hundred toward food. Brett had said no flat out. Wish I could, Sav, but you know how things are. Gas ain't free. Macy's car's got a rattle we gotta fix. Kids need new shoes. And I'd believed that too. Just like I'd believed him last year when he said he needed a loan to get ahead on rent. $1,200. Still unpaid. I'd even driven 2 hours that same weekend to drop off groceries at Mama's house when she said her fridge went out. She met me on the porch crying. Said, "You always come through, don't you?" And I did. I always did. So what was I now? Just some dependable fallback with a flower business and a decent credit score? A knot formed in my throat, sharp and familiar. I swallowed hard and stood up, walked to the mini fridge in the back corner of the studio, and pulled out the cold coffee I hadn't touched from earlier. Took one sip and nearly spit it out. Bitter. Just like everything else today. My phone buzzed again, another message from Tiana. Say the word and I'll cancel your cake order for you. I already don't trust these people to eat it with class. I cracked a smile, but it faded fast. Because the truth was, I wasn't ready to cancel anything. Not yet. There was still a part of me stubborn and small, hoping this was all just a misread, a misunderstanding. Maybe the trip was last minute. Maybe somebody else paid. Maybe. Maybe I just didn't have the full story yet. I opened Facebook and searched again. There it was. Brett's full vacation album. Family Freedom Week. We earned this. Photo after photo, pools, spa dinners, jet skis, champagne. Marcia was glowing in every frame. Not a single sign of struggle. No trace of the tears she'd used to ask me for grace. And then I saw it, one photo deep in the carousel. A dinner table sate for 8. At the end of the caption, someone had tagged, "Thanks Aunt Marcia for treating us to the best week ever." I stared at that line until the screen blurred. She didn't just lie. She hosted. My mother had told me she couldn't give me $300 toward my wedding. Then turned around and took a group to Bora Bora on what looked like a prepaid resort tab. Something inside me slid loose. It wasn't the money. It was what the money said. That their joy mattered more than my milestones. That my effort, my dreams could always come second, so long as they had their escape. I picked up my florist invoice and turned it over. The back was blank, but my hand moved before I could stop it. I wrote the words I hadn't dared say aloud. They never planned to help. I looked at the words. They looked right. I folded the paper and tucked it between the pages of my wedding planner, a book that felt heavier now, like it belonged to someone else. I sat back down and let the silence of the room settle in. No glue gun humming. No playlist in the background, just the sound of my own breath. It was the first time in weeks I didn't feel like fixing anything. The next morning, I woke up to 4 missed calls and 2 text messages, all from numbers I didn't recognize. One of them just said, "Wow, didn't realize your family was doing that well, lol." I hadn't even poured my coffee yet when I opened Instagram and saw it. A photo from my cousin, Lindsay. Sunglasses. Ocean behind her. Holding a coconut with a little umbrella in it. Hashtagged. Number family time number, grateful heart number, Bora Bora views. And I was tagged. Right there, in the comments. Someone had written, "Isn't this the wedding girl's family?" And Lindsay, bless her tone-deaf soul, replied, "Haha, yep, we needed a break from all the chaos." I just stood there, barefoot on the kitchen tile, phone in one hand, disbelief settling into my shoulders like a winter coat I hadn't chosen to wear. They weren't even hiding it anymore. It wasn't just a trip. It was a celebration. And I was the punchline. I scrolled through the comments, praying for someone to speak up. Maybe call out the timing. Mention my name with an ounce of grace. Nothing. Just heart emojis, palm trees, and wish I was there reactions. I walked back to the fridge and opened it, pretending to look for breakfast, but really just needing the cold air to keep me from crying. Inside was a container of buttercream frosting I'd made for cake sampling last week. It felt ridiculous now. All of it did. The tastings, the schedule, the vendor list printed out and clipped to the side of the fridge like it meant something. Like this wedding was still happening the way I thought it would. I shut the fridge and leaned against it. There was this tightness in my chest, not a panic attack, not yet, just the kind of pressure you feel when you've been holding your breath for too long. It wasn't just that they lied. It was that they lied so confidently, so easily. And now they were parading that lie around in swimsuits and cocktails while I counted receipts. Another text came in. This time, from a high school friend I hadn't talked to in years. "Hey, random question, didn't you say your family couldn't afford to help with the wedding? I think I saw them in a resort promo. Lol, if you need anything." A resort promo. I opened Facebook again. Scrolled. And there it was. A drone video from the resort. And right at the 27-second mark, I froze it. Clear as day. Mama in her wide-brimmed hat, laughing as someone handed her a glass of champagne. There was nothing funny about it. I closed the app. My hands were shaking. I walked out to the garage studio, where the flower mock-ups were still half-finished. The smell of dried eucalyptus and hot glue hit me like a memory I didn't ask for. I sat down on the little stool by the corner table and stared at the bouquet I'd made for the head table. Soft white roses, fake but convincing, mixed with baby's breath and a few sprigs of dusty lavender. I had spent over an hour arranging it just right. And for what? I reached for the shears on the edge of the table, then stopped. Not yet. Instead, I opened my laptop. Maybe just to distract myself. Maybe to look for flights and lose myself in pretending I could just leave too. But the browser was still on the payment portal for my linen vendor. The one I hadn't been able to pay yet. The total was still sitting there in bold red text, $850 due. And the card I was going to use? My business one, the same one I'd maxed out when I had to replace the cooler unit in January. I closed the tab. My hand was trembling. That's when I saw it. A new tag notification. This time, from Brett. A reel titled, "When Your Man Surprises You with Bora Bora." Music. Monte. Drone shots. Spay footage. Then a selfie video, Macy, giggling. "You know we needed this. We deserve this." That was the word that got me. Deserve. I stared at it for so long it stopped looking like a real word. They deserved this? What did I deserve, then? Late payments? Cancelled RSVPs? An inbox full of silence while they toasted in paradise? I stood up fast. Too fast. The stool scraped across the concrete floor and nearly tipped over. I wanted to scream. Throw something. Call someone, but I didn't. Instead, I went to the back of the studio and pulled out the box labeled Early Samples. Inside were bouquets I made before I knew what the final theme would be. Leftovers. The forgotten ones. I pulled one out, peach roses and dusty Miller, and set it on the workbench. A little wilted. A little crooked. Still holding together. I stared at it. That's how I felt. A little wilted. A little crooked. Still holding together. And then the thought came, quiet but loud. If they could go to paradise without guilt, then maybe I could let go without shame. The wedding might still be on. But the illusion? That was over. And they were never invited back in. I didn't even try to work the next day. The flower orders I'd prepped for local weddings just sat there in the cooler, untouched. My emails were piling up. The ribbon samples I'd ordered were still in their packaging, shoved under the table like a pile of unopened apologies. I didn't have it in me. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table with a sticky note, a ballpoint pen, and the heavy silence that comes when you finally stop pretending. I wrote down the total again, what I'd spent so far on the wedding. $2,400 for catering. $850 for linens. $1,600 deposit on the venue. $1,100 for photography. $400 on favors I now regretted ordering. My pen hovered for a moment before I added the last one. $3,800 what I'd loaned Brett and Mama over the past 2 years. Grocery runs, car repairs, emergencies that always came up right after I got paid. I'd told myself it was family. That you don't count the cost when you love someone. But now I couldn't stop counting. I reached for my phone and opened that photo again, the one with Mama holding a mimosa at the edge of a private infinity pool. Her face was glowing. Her feet were up. Her robe was plush white cotton, embroidered with the name of the resort. And the caption? We all deserve joy. I stared at those 5 words like they were in another language. Because joy? That's not what it felt like when I was driving 2 towns over to pick up a discount cake topper because mine fell through. Joy wasn't what I felt when I skipped the dentist last month to pay my florist supplier instead. Joy wasn't being ghosted by your own mother while she toasted coconut cocktails with strangers and said she needed rest from the stress. Stress? She wasn't the one waking up at 3 a.m. wondering how she'd pay for a wedding no one even asked to be part of. She wasn't the one fielding questions from vendors and friends and nosy neighbors asking if family would be showing up soon. That was me. Always me. I closed my eyes and leaned back in the chair, pressing the base of my palm into my chest, trying to ease the pressure building behind my ribs. I remembered last month sitting on this exact floor with my laptop and a mason jar of wine, filling out my final guest count alone because Brett said he'd circle back, and Mama never replied. That was the first time it stung. But I let it go. Told myself they were just busy. Told myself they cared, just didn't know how to show it. I wasn't telling myself that anymore. My phone buzzed. It was a notification from a bridal Facebook group I joined back when I still believed in dress hacks and centerpieces made from wine bottles. The thread was about family support or the lack of it. One woman wrote, I asked my parents for help. They said no. Then they posted pictures from Vegas. So I cut them out of the wedding and took my power back. I didn't hit like. I didn't comment. But I read it 5 times. There was a word she used that stuck with me. Power. I hadn't thought of that word in a long time. Not when it came to me, anyway. For years, I'd been the glue. The strong one. The one who made everything work. But glue gets tired. Glue cracks. I stood up and walked out to the garage, where the bouquet mock-ups were still sitting exactly where I'd left them. One of the boutonnieres had wilted. Not the real flowers, those were fake. It was the ribbon. Cheap satin that curled and dulled when the air got too humid. I picked it up. It was supposed to be Brett's. It looked hollow now. I set it back down and turned on the fan, just to have some noise. I didn't know what I was doing yet. But I knew what I wasn't doing anymore. I wasn't going to chase people who had already left me behind even if they called it a vacation. I wasn't going to design tables for people who couldn't be bothered to RSVP, let alone show up. And I wasn't going to keep swallowing guilt like it was love. My wedding wasn't just about florals and music and seating charts. It was supposed to be about building something. Something that mattered. And if the people I thought would help build it were too busy sipping champagne over ocean views, then maybe they weren't meant to be part of the foundation in the first place. I walked back inside, picked up my sticky note, and crossed out the total. Then I wrote 2 words underneath. Not worth it. I wasn't planning to open Facebook again. But it was muscle memory at that point. Thumb swipe. Tap. Scroll. Regret. And there it was. Another photo. Another caption. This time, from Mama herself. She was sitting cross-legged in a cabana, wrapped in a floral silk robe, holding what looked like a mimosa. Again. Caption said, "Feeling number grateful for the memories we make while we can." Grateful. That word hit harder than I thought it would. Not guilty. Not sorry. Not missing her daughter. Not wishing she could be here to help me through the biggest commitment of my life. Just grateful. I put the phone down fast, face down on the kitchen counter, like the photo might burn its way through the screen if I stared any longer. There was a humming in my ears, the kind you get when you're so angry it feels quiet at first. But it wasn't quiet. Not inside me. Because that word? That caption? It was proof she didn't see the problem. Or worse, that she did, and didn't care. I leaned on the counter with both hands, breathing deep. I stared at the stack of RSVP cards on the fridge and wondered if any of them even meant anything now. Only a few of them were from my side. The rest? Isaiah's family. His friends. His people. He kept asking if we needed to adjust the guest list. I kept saying no, I've got it covered. But did I? Covered what, exactly? Because right now, it felt like I'd covered my own eyes more than anything else. My phone buzzed again. Vendor reminder, final head count due by Friday. I didn't even know who was coming anymore. And I sure didn't want to explain to some stranger on the phone that my mother, my brother, and half my relatives had decided Bora Bora was a better use of their time than standing beside me. I walked out to the studio. It smelled like dust and dried glue. A ribbon was half curled on the table, left over from a boutonniere that no longer had an owner. I picked it up, just to feel something in my hands. A memory flashed, Mama teaching me how to tie bows for Christmas gifts back when I was 10. She used to say, "Pretty doesn't have to be expensive, baby. It just has to feel like care." This didn't feel like care. It felt like silence. Like being abandoned but told it was normal. Like emotional debt I hadn't signed up for. I tossed the ribbon aside. There was a knock at the back door. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, Tiana was standing there with an iced coffee in each hand, and that look she gets when she knows I'm not okay and I'm pretending to be. She handed me one. No sugar. Like you like it when you're spiraling. I gave a weak laugh, stepped aside to let her in. She didn't ask questions at first. Just sat down at my workbench and looked at the scattered flowers like she was staring at a crime scene. Finally, she said, "You gonna talk about it, or do I have to go full big sister energy and force it out of you?" I didn't answer right away. I just slid my phone across the table. She picked it up, saw the post, and gave a low whistle. Wow. Okay, so we're doing spa vibes while you're over here doing 10 jobs. I sat down across from her. She wrote, "Grateful, T," I said. Like this wasn't a choice, like I should be happy for them. Tiana didn't blink. She's not grateful. She's showing off. And you? You've been showing grace, for way too long. There was a pause. Then she added, "You know you don't have to keep bleeding just to prove you're loyal, right?" I swallowed hard. Looked down at my hands. Glue-stained fingertips. Faint ribbon cuts. My version of wedding prep didn't look anything like hers. I wanted to believe they'd show up. Eventually, I whispered. That they'd see I was worth showing up for. All right. Tiana reached into her bag and pulled out a file folder. I started calling around, she said. Just options. Backup venue quotes, cancellation policies. Elopement packages if you need a reset. No pressure. My heart thudded. It wasn't a threat. It was a lifeline. And just seeing it laid out in front of me, the idea that I could walk away from this version of the wedding and still have something beautiful, it hit me like a wave. I reached for the folder, hesitated, then opened it. Because maybe the wedding wasn't the dream. Maybe peace was. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed with the folder Tiana gave me in my lap. It was heavier than it should have been. Just paper and ink. But it felt like a choice I hadn't let myself consider until now. Backup venue options. Cancellation deadlines. A note in Tiana's handwriting that said, "You get to choose peace, too." I kept reading that one line. Like, it was written for a different woman. One braver than me. I looked around the room. It was filled with little things that used to make me feel like I was building a life-dried sample: bouquets taped to the wall, sticky notes on the closet door, Isaiah's tie draped over a chair from the last time he tried on his wedding suit. And yet, none of it felt like it belonged to me anymore. I picked up my phone, hovered over the wedding website app. Didn't touch it. Not yet. Instead, I walked back into the garage studio and turned on the overhead light. The fan hummed in the corner, stirring the ribbons, the petals, the plans. I used to love this space. It smelled like eucalyptus and sawdust and fresh beginnings. But now, all I could feel was the silence. The kind that creeps in when your hope has been quietly packing its bags for weeks and you've just now noticed. I sat at my workbench and stared at my planner. Then opened to the first page, the one with my vision sketch. A long floral aisle. Archway framed with hydrangeas. A note scribbled in the corner. Make it feel like earned joy. Earned joy. What a loaded phrase. When had my joy ever come without earning? I reached for the pen. Wrote underneath it. And make it feel like truth. Then I closed the planner. And I started making calls. Vendor after vendor. Politely. Calmly. As if I was just rescheduling an oil change or a dentist appointment. Not unraveling the biggest day of my life. Hi, I need to cancel my linen order. Or, is there a partial refund on the deposit? No, it's not a postponement, it's a change of plans. Some asked questions. Some didn't. The ones who didn't? I liked them more. I got to the venue last. My voice wavered. But I didn't cry. I just said, this isn't the wedding I need anymore. And I meant it. When I hung up the last call, my hands were shaking. But it wasn't fear. It was something else. Something close to relief. Because for the first time in weeks, maybe months, I wasn't waiting for someone else to choose me. I had chosen myself. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Isaiah. Still up? I got off early. I replied. Come by. There's something I need to tell you. He arrived 20 minutes later, still in his work clothes khakis, buttoned down, chalk dust on his sleeves from the classroom whiteboard. He smiled when he saw me. Then his eyes shifted to the stack of vendor papers on the table. He didn't ask. He just walked in, set down his keys, and waited. I looked at him, then looked at the flowers behind me. I canceled it all, I said. Quiet. Steady. He didn't move. Just nodded, like he'd known this was coming. I couldn't keep building something that already felt broken, I added. Not us. But the version of it I thought we had to force to make everyone else feel comfortable. He stepped closer. You mean the one where you carry all the weight, and they show up for the champagne? That caught me off guard. I let out a shaky laugh. He reached out and took my hand. We don't need their version, he said. We just need ours. I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath until I exhaled right then. I want to get married, I said, but I want it to feel like us. Not a performance, not an obligation. Isaiah nodded. Then we'll do that. However you want. Whatever makes you feel free, not small. I swallowed hard. Then whispered. I want simple. Quiet. Real. He squeezed my hand. We'll make it so. A beat passed. Then I added, I canceled the wedding. Not the marriage. He smiled. Good. I never cared about the flower wall anyway. I rolled my eyes. You loved the flower wall. Okay, I did, but I love you more. We stood there in the middle of my little studio, surrounded by undone bouquets and half-wrapped favors. And for the first time in days, I didn't feel embarrassed by the mess. Because the mess was honest. And so was this moment. As he pulled me into a hug, I spotted something over his shoulder, a small framed sign I'd tucked onto a shelf months ago. Grow where you're watered. I'd bought it during a vendor expo, thinking it was cute. But now, it felt like a quiet permission slip. Maybe it was time to stop planting in soil that never gave anything back. It was 2 days after I canceled the wedding when the Venmo alert hit my phone. I was standing at the sink rinsing out mason jars from a client order, hands still covered in eucalyptus leaves and floral foam, when the vibration buzzed through my pocket. I dried my hands and checked the screen. Request from Brett Granger. $400, captioned Airport Upgrades. At first, I thought it was a mistake. He couldn't seriously think I'd. But then I looked again. The profile photo was still the same one from his trip, him and Macy smiling in the surf like a couple on a honeymoon they didn't earn. The timestamp? Just posted. Still in paradise, still coasting. And somehow, still expecting me to fund their exit. I stared at the screen, motionless. Not angry. Not even surprised. Just done. I clicked decline. No explanation. No message. Just the little red X. That's all they'd given me, and now it was all they'd get. I stood there for a moment, my jaw clenched, staring at the fridge magnet that used to hold our wedding checklist. I'd taken the list down, but the magnet remained. A tiny metal heart that said, "Family means forever." I pulled it off the fridge and dropped it in the trash. And then, I opened every financial app I had. Venmo, Tele, PayPal. I went into my business banking dashboard and removed every old connection. Deleted every email rule that sent invoices to mama, just in case. I'd spent years being everyone's backup plan. Their silent solution. And for what? I froze them out. All of it. The accounts. The passwords. The shared Dropbox folder where mama once said she'd help with invitations. The Google Doc Brett never opened. The family group chat I'd created the day we got engaged. I scrolled to the top of that thread, back to the very first message. Hi everyone, excited to finally plan with y'all. Let me know what part you want to help with. Not one reply. Not one single contribution. Just weeks of silence. And then, suddenly, today a cash request. I stared at the chat one last time. Then tapped, leave group. My hands were still shaking when I locked my phone and set it face down on the counter. But the shaking wasn't fear. It was freedom. Raw and unfamiliar, but mine. The studio was quiet, except for the low hum of the mini fridge in the back. I glanced at the wire shelf, where the mock bouquets were still lined up. Some wilting, some half-finished, some still beautiful in spite of everything. I picked up one ivory roses with tiny sprigs of waxflower and gold-dipped eucalyptus. It had been meant for the head table. Now it felt like something else. A relic. A reminder of how much beauty I was capable of, even when no one was clapping. I carried it to the front of the studio and placed it in the window, beside a sign that read, "Florals by Savannah, by appointment only." Then I stood there and just breathed. That was when my phone buzzed again. Not Brett this time. Mama. Voicemail. I didn't open it right away. I just watched the notification blink at the top of the screen while my reflection stared back at me from the window. She'd been quiet for days. Maybe she was finally going to explain. Or apologize. Or maybe she'd just try to smooth it over like she always did. Pretend it wasn't a big deal. Call it a miscommunication. But this wasn't a miscommunication. This was a pattern. I opened the message and pressed play. Her voice came through soft, sweet, performative, the same tone she used to use when the church ladies dropped by unexpected. Hi baby, just wanted to check in. Your brother mentioned something about a payment issue, not sure what happened. Everything's been a little hectic here. You know how it is on group trips. I'm sure it's just a mix-up. Let's chat soon, love you. A mix-up. I stared at the phone. Not one word about the wedding. Not one mention of the time, the energy, the money, the trust. Just confusion about the fact that her access had been removed. That was what mattered. Not me. Not the damage. The access. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood there, feeling the last string between us snap so soft I almost missed it. I hit delete. Then I opened notes and typed something I didn't think I'd ever be able to admit. My love doesn't need to be proven through debt, silence, or pretending I'm okay. I stared at the sentence, then added one more line. If they wanted a daughter they could take for granted, they picked the wrong one. It started the next morning. I was barely out of bed, hair still matted to one side, when my phone lit up with a voicemail from Aunt Joanne. I didn't even know she had my number. Her voice was sharp with fake concern, like the kind of tone people use at funerals when they're more worried about who showed up than who died. Savannah, sweetheart, I heard there's been some drama. You know your mama's heart can't take all that. Don't let a misunderstanding ruin the most important day of your life. Alu. I sat on the edge of the bed and listened twice. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't ask how I was doing. She just asked me not to ruin it. As if I hadn't spent the last 6 months pouring everything I had into a wedding they treated like a suggestion. And now? Now that they couldn't access my money, my time, or my emotional labor. Suddenly, they were all concerned. I walked into the kitchen and started the coffee, letting the sound of the old machine drown out my thoughts. A few seconds later, another buzz. Text from Brett. Can we talk like adults before you go making this a public embarrassment? Public embarrassment. I laughed out loud. Short, sharp, bitter. They didn't want reconciliation. They wanted damage control. My hands tightened around the coffee mug. These were the same people who'd ignored every RSVP email, who watched me struggle to afford my own wedding while they swam with dolphins in the South Pacific. And now I was the one who needed to calm down. I sat down at the table and looked at the framed photo I kept there, the one of me and Mama from when I was little, both of us in matching aprons, flour smudged on our cheeks. She looked so proud. I looked so loved. I hated how much I missed that version of her. The one who'd taught me how to braid pie crust and told me, if it's worth doing with care. I didn't know where that woman went. But she hadn't been on the other end of my phone in a long time. Another voicemail. This time from Macy. I didn't even open it. Just stared at the notification while my heart pounded. They weren't reaching out to fix anything. They were circling, tightening, trying to spin the story back into their favor. And then came the post. Brett, on Facebook. A moody background photo and a caption. Some people don't understand what family means until it's too late. Who? The comments flooded in within minutes. People I hadn't spoken to in years chiming in with prayers, vague questions, and passive judgment. My name wasn't mentioned. But I didn't have to be tagged to feel the sting. I closed the app, turned off notifications, and just sat there, staring at the soft hum of my phone like it was something I didn't recognize anymore. The quiet used to scare me. Now it felt like air. Later that afternoon, I walked out to the garage studio to clean up the remnants of what used to be my wedding prep space. The table still held scraps of ribbon and glue-stuck floral tape. I ran my hand along the edge, fingertips catching on dried bits of lavender. That's when I saw the small folded piece of paper I'd tucked under the bouquet display. A note from Isaiah. He'd written it months ago when I was stressing over centerpiece costs and vendor deposits. We could get married under a street lamp and I'd still say yes 100 times. I ran my thumb over the words. They were wrinkled now. Slightly faded. But still legible. Still steady. Still true. I picked up the note and slipped it into my back pocket. Because no matter what storm the Grangers were kicking up, I still had my clarity. And I wasn't about to let them bury it under a pile of guilt and Sunday school shame. Just as I was turning off the studio light, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was Dad. He hadn't called in months. Hadn't said a word since the engagement. Just the occasional like on Facebook and once, a thumbs up to an RSVP request I'd sent out twice. Now he texted. I didn't agree with all this, but they're my family too. 12 words. That's all I got. Not, how are you? Not, you didn't deserve this. Just another shrug from the sidelines. I stared at that message, waiting for something else to follow. It didn't. So I didn't respond. Because if the best he could do was try to stay neutral while watching me drown, then he wasn't neutral. He was complicit. I sat on the porch that night, wrapped in a quilt my grandmother made before she passed, watching the last of the pink melt from the sky. The crickets were loud. The kind of loud that reminds you just how quiet your phone has finally become. And it hit me. They weren't mad because I canceled a wedding. They were mad because I stopped letting them write my story. The call came just after noon, right as I was finishing a delivery for a spring baby shower. I almost didn't answer. The number wasn't saved, and I'd stopped trusting unscheduled contact. But I was tired. Tired of avoiding. Tired of flinching every time my phone buzzed. So I picked up. Hi, is this Savannah Granger? The voice was cheerful, like she was calling from a garden party. This is Melanie from the Lowcountry Living Weekly. Just wanted to confirm a few details for your upcoming wedding feature. We've got you and Isaiah scheduled for the spring spotlight next issue. I stood there in the middle of someone else's driveway, arms full of pastel daisies, stomach dropping. I hadn't submitted anything. The realization hit before she even finished. They pulled it from our engagement announcement. Probably found the old wedding website, too. Another automated celebration for a wedding that no longer existed. Oh, I managed. There's actually been a change in plans. A pause. Oh, I'm so sorry. Should I remove the feature? I looked down at the bouquet in my hands, white tulips and lemon leaf greens, soft and hopeful. No, I said. You can still run it. We're still getting married. Just not in the way we thought. She sounded relieved. Well, congratulations either way. It's a beautiful story. I thanked her and hung up. Then I got in my car and sat still for a long time. Air conditioning, humming, wondering how many more people thought they knew my story based on a photo or a date that no longer matched reality. I pulled up the paper's Instagram. There it was. Our engagement photo, posted just an hour ago. Captioned, "A Lowcountry love story. Savannah and Isaiah set to tie the knot next month." The comments were pouring in. Friends, clients, distant cousins. So happy for you. Such a beautiful couple. Can't wait to see the big day. The knot in my chest tightened. Not because they were wrong, but because it was all built on an image that didn't exist anymore. A wedding full of guests that weren't coming. A day designed for people who'd left me out of theirs. I almost deleted the post. Almost messaged Melanie back and asked her to pull the feature. But then I remembered the conversation with Isaiah in the studio. The way he looked at me when I told him I canceled it all. The way he said, "We just need ours." Maybe we weren't the wedding people expected. But we were still something real. Still something worth showing up for. And maybe the people who didn't deserve front row seats just wouldn't get them. That night, I opened the wedding website for the first time since I hit pause. I deleted the registry. Archived the RSVP list. Removed the timeline that had become a map of other people's failures. Then I updated the header. Instead of a countdown, it read, "Plans change, but love doesn't." I stared at the screen. Let the silence settle. And then I hit save. A soft knock at the front door pulled me out of the moment. It was Tiana, holding a bottle of wine and a small, flat package. "You descends?" "Barely," I said, opening the door wider. She walked in without waiting for permission, the way only a best friend can. "Figured you might want company before the storm rolls in." I looked outside. The sky was clear. She smiled. "I meant the family. They're back in town, right?" I nodded. "Landed this morning." I hadn't heard from any of them. Not a word since the string of guilt-drenched voicemails and Brett's half-hearted Facebook stunt. But I knew they knew. And I knew silence didn't mean peace. Tiana handed me the package. "What's this?" She shrugged. "Just open it." Inside was a framed print. Simple black lettering on white canvas. It read, "Blood makes relatives. Loyalty makes family." My throat caught. "I saw it and thought of you," she said. "Thought maybe you'd like to put it somewhere near your flowers, so you don't forget." I nodded, too choked up to answer. We sat on the couch, legs curled under us, wine glasses sweating on the coffee table. And for the first time in a long while, I let myself feel the quiet without fearing what it meant. This was still a beginning. Even if it didn't look like the one I planned. They landed on a Tuesday. I knew because the airport tagged their return flight in a sponsored postone of those vacation recap reels with palm trees and steel drums in the background. I didn't even have to click. There was Mama, rolling her luggage past baggage claim, still in flip-flops and a tan that said, "We made the most of it." Like nothing had happened. Like the last few weeks hadn't existed at all. I told myself I wouldn't react. Told myself I was past all that. But my heart still did that old familiar drop, the one I used to feel in middle school when I walked past a birthday party I wasn't invited to. The next day, she came by. No call. No text. Just showed up at my flower studio while I was restocking the cooler with spring stems. I saw her through the front window, all smiles and oversized sunglasses, like she was stopping by after Sunday service. She let herself in. "Hey baby," she chirped, setting her purse on the counter. "Thought I'd drop in, see how everything's going." Everything. As if we were just picking up where we left off. I straightened a mason jar on the shelf. "It's going fine." "Flat." Measured. She looked around like she was assessing inventory. "You got some new colors in, huh? Pretty." I nodded. She didn't sit. She didn't ask. She just stood there, bouncing slightly on her toes, like she was waiting for me to open the conversation. I didn't. Finally, she exhaled and said, "So, Brett told me there were some hurt feelings, misunderstandings, maybe." He blinked. "A misunderstanding." She smiled, tilting her head. "Well, I mean, everything kinda snowballed, didn't it? And vacations. They take a lot of planning, you know." My throat went dry. Not from shock, from the confirmation. There would be no apology. Only positioning. I leaned against the counter. "You knew I was planning a wedding. You cried on the phone when I said the catering deposit was due. Told me you felt awful not being able to contribute. Then you paid for a beachfront resort." Her face shifted just for a second. Then back to that tight-lipped smile she used when someone at church asked too personal a question. "I needed a break, sweetheart. We all did. I've had a hard year." "And I haven't?" The words came out quieter than I meant, but sharper too. She blinked. "Of course you have. But your wedding isn't everything." I nodded slowly. "You're right. It's not. That's why I canceled it." That landed. Her eyebrows lifted. "You what?" "I canceled the wedding," I said again, voice steady. "The dress fittings, the venue, the guest list. Gone. Gone." Her mouth opened, then closed. I didn't think you'd actually." "No," I cut in. "You didn't. That's the problem." The air in the studio thickened. Even the flowers felt like they were listening. She shifted her purse from one shoulder to the other. "I just think there's been some overreaction. You know how family can be. Things get messy. But in the end, we're still us." "No," I said again. "We're not." Her expression changed just a flicker. A flash of something that looked like panic before she caught it. "I've always been there for this family," I said. "Always. And when I needed you just once, you made me feel like I was asking too much." She looked away. "I didn't think it'd matter that much." That broke something in me. "You didn't think my wedding would matter?" "I thought you'd understand." I stared at her. At the woman who once drove 3 hours to bring me soup when I had strep throat in college. At the same woman who'd just spent her savings on a vacation while I canceled the biggest day of my life alone. I realized then maybe both those versions of her were true. And maybe only one of them was showing up now. She straightened her shoulders. So, are you two still getting married? We are, I said. Just not for anyone but us. She nodded slowly. Well, I guess that's what matters. It didn't sound like a blessing. More like a truce she hadn't agreed to. She turned toward the door. I'll let you get back to work. I didn't walk her out. After she left, I stood in the middle of the shop, hands trembling, heart racing, wondering why speaking my truth still felt like betrayal. I looked over at the window. The bouquet I'd placed there last week was wilting. Soft petals curling inward, color fading. I didn't throw it out. I just moved it off the display. Because some things you don't need to showcase anymore. Some things are better left behind the scenes where they belonged all along. The invitations were digital. No embossed envelopes. No RSVP cards with floral borders. Just a short message from me and Isaiah. Clean, direct, honest. We're still getting married. Just not how we planned. Join us if you know what love looks like when it's earned. There was no Mr. and Mrs. line. No family crest, no grand gestures. Just the truth. And for the first time in weeks, sending it didn't feel like a task. It felt like a line in the sand. We picked a quiet spot on the river, just off the back path behind the botanical gardens where I used to volunteer. No stage. No seating chart. Just a few folding chairs and the hum of spring. Tiana helped me string twinkle lights through the trees. Isaiah found a jazz trio through a guy at the school who owed him a favor. We borrowed a sound system. I made my own bouquet. And when we double-checked the final guest count, it didn't hit 50. That number used to scare me. Now? It felt like peace. People showed up who mattered. Isaiah's dad flew in from Ohio. My old art teacher came. Even Miss Connie from the flower wholesaler brought a bundt cake and tears in her eyes. The air felt different that morning. Not performative. Not forced. Just full. Full of people who knew how to show up without a guilt trip. We started a little late because the music guy forgot his power strip. And I laughed about it. The kind of laugh I hadn't let out since before the dress fittings, the payment reminders, and the slow ache of disappointment. I didn't wear white. I wore dusty rose. Simple, soft, with sleeves that made me feel like I could breathe again. Isaiah looked at me like he'd seen the whole storm and still chose the rain. And when I walked down that uneven aisle, petals crunching underfoot, I didn't think about who wasn't there. I thought about every time I'd shown up for people who didn't clap. And how I was finally clapping for myself. We didn't do vows in front of everyone. We did those later, under the magnolia tree, when the guests had gone and the leftover pie was cooling on a bench. But we did say one thing out loud, for everyone to hear. This isn't about what we lost, it's about what we're building. And that was enough. Afterward, someone asked if I was sad not to see my mom in the crowd. I paused before answering. Not because I didn't know, but because I wanted to be careful. No, I said. I already said goodbye to the version of her I was hoping would show up. They nodded. Didn't ask more. Didn't need to. By the time the sun dipped behind the trees and the jazz slowed to a hush, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not because it was perfect, but because it was mine. Tiana hugged me goodbye with both arms and whispered, "You did it, Sav. You really did it without them." And I smiled. Turns out, I was never the one who needed fixing. That night, Isaiah and I sat barefoot on our porch, champagne in mugs, my bouquet wilting between us. He reached for my hand and said, "You know, when I first proposed, I thought I was giving you a promise. But now I realize you gave one back the second you stopped chasing what was hurting you." I looked at him. Even if that hurt had a familiar face? Especially then. The stars blinked above us like they were in on the quiet joke. That healing doesn't always look like a speech or a scream. Sometimes it's just an open door you choose not to walk through anymore. A week later, a card arrived. No return address. Just my name, in Mama's handwriting. Inside was a single sentence. I saw the photos. I hope you know what you've done. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I folded the card once, slowly, and placed it in the back of the drawer with my extra ribbon spools. Because I did know. I knew exactly what I'd done. I got married. Without permission. Without apology. Without waiting for people who only ever showed up when it benefited them. And that was the real ceremony. We didn't go on a honeymoon. Not a real one. Not the kind with passports and palm trees. But the night after the wedding, Isaiah drove us out to a cabin in the mountains. Nothing fancy. No itinerary. Just a quiet place with creaky floors, old quilts, and a fire pit out back. The kind of place where silence didn't feel like absence, it felt like exhale. I remember waking up that first morning, sun pouring in through crooked blinds, his arms still wrapped around my waist like we hadn't moved all night. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to earn my rest. I wasn't bracing for a phone call. Wasn't rehearsing how to explain myself. Wasn't carrying the weight of people I'd already put down. Just me. Just him. And a stillness that felt more sacred than any altar we could have stood at. We made breakfast barefoot, using a pan that stuck no matter how much butter we added. The eggs burned a little. We laughed anyway. There was no timeline. No guests. No eyes watching. Only us. Later that afternoon, I sat on the front steps with a mug of coffee gone cold, flipping through the guest photos on my phone. One picture stopped me. Me and Tiana, right before the ceremony. She was pinning a stray curl behind my ear, and I was looking down, smiling like I'd finally figured something out. I stared at that image for a long time. Not because it was perfect, but because I could see it. The shift. The me I'd fought for. The one who didn't beg. Didn't explain. Didn't shrink. The next photo was me and Isaiah under the magnolia tree, our hands linked, my head resting against his shoulder. No backdrop. No crowd. Just two people choosing each other. And suddenly, I thought, maybe this is what a blessing really looks like. Not applause. Not approval. But peace. A few days later, back at home, I walked into the studio to find a small envelope slipped under the door. No name. No return address. Inside was a card with embossed edges, the kind Mama liked to keep for proper occasions. Inside, just a check. No note. No explanation. Made out to me. Amount, $2,000. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at it. Was it guilt? A bribe? An attempt to rewrite the past in neat, financial penstrokes? I thought about depositing it. Thought about shredding it. Thought about mailing it back with a copy of the guest list and a highlighter. But in the end, I just placed it in the bottom drawer right beside the card she sent after the wedding. Because silence, in a fancy envelope, is still silence. And money doesn't heal what someone won't name. That night, Isaiah and I sat on the porch again, this time with tea instead of champagne. The wind was warm. The stars were out. I told him about the check. He didn't ask what I'd do with it. He just looked at me and said, "You don't owe anyone your forgiveness if they never asked for it." I nodded. And I meant it. But later, lying in bed, I let my hand drift across the nightstand to where I'd tucked a photo, the one of me and Mama in the kitchen, covered in flour, matching aprons, and messy hair. I still missed her. That version of her. And maybe I always would. But I didn't want her back badly enough to lose myself again. The next morning, I woke early. Made a list of what I wanted for the studio in the next year: new signage, maybe a mural on the side wall, more community events. It wasn't a distraction. It was a decision. To grow in a direction that didn't include chasing shadows. By the time I unlocked the studio door, the sun was already rising over Main Street. I turned the sign to open. Behind me, the same framed print Tiana gave me: blood makes relatives. Loyalty makes family. Still sat near the window. I moved it slightly, so it faced the front door. Because now it was part of the welcome. And as the first customer of the day stepped inside, a teenager with wide eyes and $20 to spend on apology flowers, I smiled and said, "You've come to the right place."